introduction, Zsuzsa. So, as Zsuzsa explained, our presentation, it was submitted as a joint presentation because it's the result of a collaboration between the Literary Studies Department at Ghent University and the Ghent Center for Digital Humanities, which is also based at Ghent University. I'm the literary scholar. Lise and Christophe are both involved in the Ghent Center for Digital Humanities. Christophe is the director and Lise is scientific collaborator, and she is online. If you have any technical DH-related questions, she'll be happy to answer them. So this is a presentation about teaching periodicals and periodical studies, and it's actually the first time that I'm giving that kind of presentation, so it's also new for me and a bit exciting. It's something that I wanted to share with you, a bit of an experiment that we did last year with teaching periodicals. So a bit of context first. The course or module or whatever you call it in your own context that we taught was part of an inter-university advanced master's program in literary studies. So the students in this program already have an MA degree, but they usually go on to do research. They're considering submitting a doctoral proposal, and that's why they do this additional MA program. The course that we taught within that program is officially called Book History and Digital Humanities, which we interpreted a bit freely. We turned it into Periodical Studies and Digital Humanities. We taught it last academic year, 21 to 22, on campus. We made it without any lockdowns. There were 6 3-hour weekly sessions, and we had 5 students, 4 Flemish and 1 Dutch student. And it was co-taught by Lise and me. And we focused on a particular, I should first explain, the course had 2 main components, of course, the periodical studies, digital humanities. In terms of periodical studies, we focused on a fortnightly Belgian-Dutch feminist-socialist periodical called the Vrouw, Woman in English, published between 1893 and 1900. And more particularly, we focused on the poetry published in this periodical. And we had a couple of guiding questions for the students. So how does studying this periodical, the Vrouw, contribute to a better understanding of Belgian pre-war feminism? Why would we study the poetry in this periodical? How can we, first of all, map this poetry? And how can we read and understand it in its specific material and historical contexts? So that's the periodical studies part of the course. Then in terms of digital humanities, we wanted the students to develop digital literacy and digital skills. We wanted, in particular, to invite them to think about something that Jim Mussel wrote in his book, The 19th Century Press in the Digital Age. He writes in the introduction that the digitization of the press presents an opportunity to reimagine what we know about the 19th century. And we wanted them to think about the differences between a printed object, a digital object, and a digital resource. This is also a distinction that Mussel makes in his book. So what we did in the first class was have a look at the original copies of the periodical, and I'd checked the catalogue of the UGent Central Library, and it mentioned what I thought was 3 volumes. There were 3 years mentioned in the catalogue. I think it was 1893, 1895, 1897, something like that. So I ordered these items, and when we were at the library, we were escorted to a room, and there was a small folder on the table that I wasn't really paying attention to because I was expecting big volumes to arrive, so we were just standing there and waiting until I thought maybe I should have a look at this small folder, and I opened it, and there were just 3 single issues. So the catalogue mentioned years, but it was just 3 single issues. And that was actually a bit of luck that we had there, because single issues in 19th century periodicals are rare to come by these days. And one of the issues still had the wrapper around it. It had an advertisement section, and another one had a supplement, a children's story. And all of this was unavailable in the digitized version. So already there, then and there, we could have a conversation with the students about what is lost in the process of digitization. And we were lucky to have the Dutch student on our little group of students, because Flemish students tend to be a bit shy and reserved, but the Dutch student picked up a copy and she just started reading the editorial to the first issue, reading out loud, and the other ones were listening. So that was, I think, a very interesting and productive class, also thanks to the input of the students who were present. So how do we go from a printed object to a digital object? We digitize it, obviously, but that doesn't make it a digital resource. What do we need to do to turn that digital object into a digital resource? That has to do with how is the object presented? What can you do with a collection of digitized objects? How can you search it? What kind of interface do you use? How is it mediated for users? So all these questions were questions that we asked at the beginning of this class or this course. And then also the difference between readers and users. We tend to think of ourselves as literary scholars, as readers, perhaps primarily. But because we engage so much and so often with the digital, we are also not just readers of text, but also users of digital resources. And using something implies that you do something with the digital object, with the digital resource. You create, for example, through a search interface, you create different points of entry than readers at the time would have had into the periodical. You can download an image, you can print it, and then it's again remediated. So these are all things that we invited the students to think about. And then also, of course, we wanted to teach them digital skills. How do we develop that digital object into a digital resource? We wanted to introduce them to IIIF, which Beatrice also mentioned in her fabulous, I have to say, fabulous keynote this morning. And we wanted to introduce him to Madoc, the platform that we used in the course. I'll talk about all of this in a bit more detail now. So first of all, the collection that we had. It's a full run of the Vrouw, so 8 volumes, 179 issues. There are actually 2 more, but there are 2 missing from this particular collection, which are in the Delphi, the Dutch Delphi collection, by the way. So we can reconstruct the full run if we like. This collection was digitized and made freely available by the Amsab-Institute of Social History in Ghent using IIIF standards. Now, what is IIIF? If you have never heard of IIIF, and I hadn't until a couple of years ago, but I think it's definitely the way forward also in periodical studies when it comes to digitization and how we share digital objects. So it's the International Image Interoperability Framework. It's not a website, it's not a database. It can sound a bit abstract if you first hear about it, but it's an image standard and a service offering standardized access to digital objects. IIIF allows us to cite and share digital objects, and a digital object could be a digitized periodical page, a collection of pages, a full run of a periodical in digital format. It allows you to display digital objects, to create digital stories with and around digitized periodicals, and it allows you to annotate them. The prime unit in IIIF is the so-called IIIF manifest. And the manifest consists of the image and the metadata. You can think of it as a suitcase that travels around. So you always have your little IIIF suitcase, you have the image in it, but you also have always traveling with it the metadata, which could be, for instance, the library from which it was digitized. It could be the title of the periodical. It could be the page number, the date of publication, any copyright information that is available. So all of that information stays with the image. So you always have a sense of origin, and you always have that additional information about the image. So that is, in a nutshell, IIIF. So why IIIF? Why would we use this standard? Now, I think the situation in terms of periodical databases of digitized periodicals, it's usually what's on the left. You have your databases that you regularly use, but, and I also explained this in my talk a couple of days ago, they're usually closed off from each other. They're not cross-searchable. They're data silos, basically. IIIF creates more of an ecosystem where everything can be exchanged and interconnected. It can be shared among resources. That's one of the good things about IIIF, that we move away from closed-off databases, but create this huge ecosystem, or at least have the opportunity to create huge ecosystems of digitized periodical collections. And Madoc is part of the IIIF movement. It's a IIIF transcription, annotation and crowdsourcing platform. It's open source, it's free to use for everyone. And it was developed by Digerati and co-funded by the Claria Flanders Infrastructure Project and a number of other projects and institutions. In Madoc, you can, as a user, assemble digital collections with IIIF objects from multiple archives, libraries, and museums, and you can build an interpretative website around them. You can both import and enhance existing metadata. You can annotate digital objects and image regions. You can run crowdsourcing projects, and you can also showcase and export your results. So this is basically the Madoc enrichment pipeline. So the basic principle is that IIIF goes in and IIIF comes out. So you have your IIIF manifests that were already provided by the Amsab that we pulled into Madoc. You can then add additional, import additional plugins for OCR, for instance, if that hasn't been done already. Image segmentation, where you identify particular parts of an image. You can enrich the content through transcriptions by adding additional metadata, translations, comments, anything. And then IIIF comes out again, but enriched. And it can be shared on and through other resources. So teaching Madoc and teaching with Madoc. So what we first of all did, and what Lise in fact did, was importing the full IIIF collection of the Vrouw into Madoc. And this is Madoc, this is the work environment of Madoc, which was still very much under development at the time. So the students also functioned as a test panel. They could also give us feedback on Madoc and what needed to change or improve. So we had the full collection, 179 items of the Vrouw in Madoc. Students could then start a new project in Madoc, and we agreed that they would do a joint project as a team where they would look at the periodical as a whole, and then each of them would do an individual sub-project within that bigger project where they would focus on something that had drawn their attention and that they wanted to delve deeper into. The next step was creating a capture model. Now, a capture model in Madoc is a kind of data model which we brainstormed with the students. We invited them to think about what kinds of information do you want to gather about the poetry? What kind of data do you need in your metadata? So first of all, they wanted title, author, birth and death dates. Theme could be something that you want to know about, that you want to have information on. Form, source, if it's a reprint or a poem that has been published elsewhere, a translation. All of that information can be part of your capture model. But what is in your capture model, of course, depends on what your research questions are. So this was also an exercise in tailoring the data model to the particular questions that they wanted to answer. So they decided that it would have basically two main components, so metadata and then an analytical section where they could engage in close reading, in discussion of the surrounding materials, and offer historical contextualization. So this is what it actually looked like. So the students went through all of the issues of the Vrouw. They drew boxes around the poetry, and then they entered all of the metadata into Madoc. Name of the author, the title, birth and death dates, and so on. So they did that for all of the poetry in the periodical. They also had to design the web environment. So they developed this little collage of images from poems of the Vrouw. They wrote a little introduction to their project where they explained who they were and why they were developing this project. Then they also had a joint introduction. So this was also an exercise in writing something together and doing all the planning that involves co-authoring texts and publications. So for those who then went on to a PhD program, I hope this was an interesting exercise in writing something and working together with fellow students. And this is an example of a sub-project where the student decided to focus on 3 particular issues of the Vrouw, so they could pull those 3 issues into their particular sub-project and add all of the information then as a kind of it is a bit like the traditional research essay, but in a much more dynamic environment. So some insights that came from this little exercise, this course that we taught. So of the 8 volumes, the 179 issues, there were 112 poems. As it turned out, they decided to divide the workload in terms of volumes. One would do the first 2 volumes, the other 3 and 4, and so on. But the ones who'd chosen the first few volumes actually had the most work because poetry was much more frequent and more prominent in the first 2 volumes. A lot of it was original poetry, which was clearly specifically written for the periodical, often by male poets, particularly in the early years of the periodical, and many of them were linked in some way to the socialist movement. This was a socialist feminist periodical that really sought to connect with the socialist cause. So part of that early endeavor of establishing the periodical was establishing connections with the socialist movement in Flanders and in the Netherlands. So it clearly had a political agenda of which the poetry was very much part. A lot of the poetry had a moralizing tone, which is not surprising. And there were more translations and female poets in later volumes. But towards the end, poetry had almost completely disappeared. And we think this was because the editors, the editor, by that time it was just one editor, had just too much work to also care about the poetry. But poetry played a key role in establishing the periodical and shaping its political agenda. So to conclude, how do we go beyond hierarchies with IIIF and Madoc? I think it allows us to take a collaborative, more egalitarian approach to periodical studies. There are no centers and hierarchies in IIIF. Everything comes together on a much more equal basis. We can bring together and share discrete periodical collections. We can overcome the center-periphery dichotomies. And it also invites us, I think, to rethink research, publication, and teaching practices in the humanities and in our particular context of literary studies, because this is much more dynamic than the traditional research essay, which students still need to write. But often, when it comes to engaging with periodicals, limits them because they want to present the materials that they've been working with in a much more dynamic way, and just including pictures or screenshots is just too limiting in terms of what they want to share and argue. So Madoc offers you that more dynamic environment for doing and publishing research. It also teaches students digital skills, and I don't know what it's like at your universities, but in my program, students are not taught any digital skills until they're in their MA years, which is way too late. I think we need to start teaching them these skills a lot earlier. And in the final class, when we had a brief discussion about their experiences, something that they really appreciated about the course was that it was so hands-on, and that if they like to work for a museum or a cultural heritage institution, at least they could put that on their CV, that they had this experience, that they know what IIIF is, that they have experience developing a data model, a capture model, that they know about Madoc. And also, in terms of teaching practices, that it offers you a lot of potential for collaboration, not just among students, but we could also collaborate among teachers on our own digital projects, invite our students to work together on periodicals, perhaps from our own different linguistic perspectives. So in that sense too, I think it's a way of going beyond the traditional hierarchies in academia as well. Thank you.